Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is the secret doctrine we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to follow along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in, and in just a second, continue our exploration, but I want to talk about this real quick. The next part of this study after today would be symbology, and the one after that would be contradictions between science and theosophy. We have covered both of those topics extensively in Isis Unveiled, which is one of the playlists. It is part of the Esoterica playlist. It has its own playlist. And I don't think that there's going to be any new information contained in either one of those two chapters. Despite the length, it is probably just going to be a reiteration of the things that we've already covered. And so I'm not going to cover it. I'm going to stop after this video in this particular study. This is not the first time that we've stopped a study. This is the first time that I'm telling you ahead of time that we stopped a study, right? We didn't finish the Irish lore. We didn't finish some of the Egyptian stuff simply because there wasn't a whole lot to get out of it, and there was no point in continuing it. This is about increasing knowledge. This is about expanding the viewpoint. It's about growing as people and learning how to do magic and effectively communicate that is the point of this. There's not a whole lot that has been contained in either one of these two works that lend towards that greatly. There have been plenty of things for us to discuss, and we have learned a few things. I learned a lot about Buddhism that I did not know. Eventually, we will probably get into a study of Buddhism, but the next study after this one is going to be esotericism. We will be in G.R.S. Mead, who is one of the sources that Mrs. Blavatsky uses. Apparently he was her assistant, but she still quotes him a lot. So we're going to dive into the G.R.S. Mead next. I just wanted to let you know ahead of time that this will be the last video in this particular study. Conclusion. Space forbids us to say anything more, and this part of the secret doctrine has to be closed. The 49 stanzas and the few fragments from the commentaries just given are all that can be published in these volumes. These, with some still older records to which none but the highest initiates have access, and a whole library of comments, glossaries, and explanations, form the synopsis of man's genesis. If you have any of these records, right, we're going to G.R.S. Mead because he has taken the time to go in and do most of the grunt work on the Gnosticism, right? I've been accused of being a Gnostic. I don't have a full comprehension even of what that means, and so we will be going into that. Gnostic is from gnosis, gnosis is from knowing. He apparently correlates a lot of the source material, some of which is unavailable to us today, and that's why I'm going there. If there is some of her source material, right, that is not been covered in this, let me know down below so that I can get on to that, right? I want the part that cannot be published in these volumes. That is specifically what I'm looking for, right? If it's already contained in here, there's really not a whole lot of point. But if there is something outside that would bring further light to the situation, drop that in the box down below, and we will definitely cover that as soon as time allows. All right, back to the text. It is from the commentaries that we have hitherto quoted and tried to explain the hidden meaning of some of the allegories, thus showing the true views of esoteric antiquity upon geology, anthropology, and even ethnology. We will endeavor in the part which follows to establish a still closer metaphysical connection between the earliest races and their creators, the divine men from other worlds. Accompanying these statements proffered with the most important demonstrations of the same in esoteric astronomy and symbolism. We will eventually be getting to astronomy as well, or astrology. I doubt it's going to be the science of calculating the movements. It's going to be more about what the movements mean. right? I want to see where that lies too. So if you have a good source for that, let me know down below. I am piecing together a whole lot of stuff, but I would like if there was a cohesive explanation for why we have the zodiac in the particular configuration that it is. It appears that it is quite piecework, and that's interesting to me. In volume 3 of this work, the said volume and the 4th being almost ready, a brief history of all the great adepts known to the ancients and moderns in their chronological order will be given, as also a bird's eye view of the mysteries, their birth, growth, decay, and final death in Europe. This could not find room in the present work. Volume 4 will be almost entirely devoted to occult teachings. That is not true, right? Let's look at it real quick, because this is why I made the decision, right? Why we are not going to do it. This is the table of contents. Book 2, part of the archaic symbolism of the world religions. We've already covered the esoteric tenets covered in the scripture. We've already talked about Adam and the creation story there. We've talked about the Holy of Holies. We've talked about the myth of the fallen angels. All of this we have already talked about as far as I can remember, right? And then part 3, which is book 4, Addenda, Science and the Secret Doctrine Contrasted, the archaic anthropology, ancestors of mankind offered by science. Like all of this, again, we have covered. There is no, where did it say? Right here. Almost entirely devoted to occult teachings. Really? That's what this is? That's what this is. I bet. Back to the text. The duration of the periods that separate in space and time the 4th from the 5th race in the historical footnote. The word historical is used because although historians have dwarfed almost absurdly the dates that separate certain events from our modern day, nevertheless, once that they are known and accepted, they belong to history. Thus, the Trojan War is a historical event, and though even less than 1,000 years BC is the date assigned to it, yet in truth it is nearer 6,000 than 5,000 years BC. Now, this is one of those things that I believe, but we do not have any proof for, right? The way that it reads to me is that it is probably concurrent with the Atlantis peoples, right? They could have been the Danans referred to quite often, right? If you are unaware, the historical god people, right? And that is a very loose appellation for the Celtic Irish people, was the Tuatha De Danann, which is part of the name of the Danans, which was so extensively in the Iliad, right? We just did the entirety of the Iliad, and every single book had a reference to the Danans, however it's pronounced. That seems like it may be aligned with the Tuatha De Danann, right? That is completely speculative. That is me just pulling shit out of my ass, so take it with a grain of salt. But it reads that way. It even reads that way when you read the actions of them, right? The Tuatha De Danann, as they were recorded in Ireland, and the way that they are recorded, if it is them, in the Iliad, is somewhat similar. And so I come to the conclusion that, even though it is entirely speculative, if my speculations are correct, then it makes sense that it would be just over 6,000 years ago, because we are coming back upon the 6,000 year marker where we will have the disaster cycle taking place. And if they were wiped out in the same way that Atlantis was wiped out, then we would have what we saw or what we see. And so once again, that is just pulling something out of my ass. It is completely speculative. Take it with a grain of salt, but it seems to fit to me, even though I do not as of yet have any corroborating evidence. I'm not trying to say that it is fact. I don't want anybody to think that I am, right? Many of the things that are referred to in here, she is way off base on, in my estimation, but that's probably not one of them. In the historical or even the legendary beginnings of the latter is too tremendous for us to offer, even to a theosophist, any more detailed accounts of them. During the course of the post-Diluvian ages, marked at certain periodical epochs by the most terrible cataclysms, too many races and nations were born, and have disappeared almost without leaving a trace, for anyone to offer any description of the slightest value concerning them. Whether the masters of wisdom have a consecutive and full history of our race from its incipient stage down to the present times, whether they possess the uninterrupted record of man since he became the complete physical being, and became thereby the king of the animals and master on this earth, is not for the writer to say. Most probably they have, and such is our own personal conviction. But if so, this knowledge is only for the highest initiates, who do not take their students into their confidence. The writer can therefore but give but what she has herself been taught, and no more. But even this will appear to the profane reader as a weird, fantastic dream, than as a possible reality. This is only natural, and as it should be, since for years such was the impression made upon the humble writer of this pages herself. Born and bred in European, matter-of-fact, and presumably civilized countries, she assimilated the foregoing with the utmost difficulty. But there are proofs of a certain character which became irrefutable and are undeniable in the long run, to every earnest and unprejudiced mind. For a series of years, such were offered to her, and now she has the full certitude that our present globe, and its human races, must have been born, grown, developed in this, and in no other way. But this is the personal view of the writer, and her orthodoxy cannot be expected to have any more weight than any other doxy, in the eyes of those whom every fresh theory is heterodox until otherwise proved. Therefore, are we occultists fully prepared for such questions as these? How does one know that the writer has not invented the whole scheme, and supposing she has not, how can one tell that the whole of the foregoing, as given in the stanzas, is not the product of the imagination of the ancients? How could they have preserved the records of such an immense, such an incredible antiquity? You would have to give proof. The answer that the history of the world since its formation and to its end is written in the stars. An example is recorded in the zodiac and the universal symbolism, whose keys are in the keeping of the initiates, will hardly satisfy the doubters. You are abso-fucking-lutely correct. It does not satisfy the doubters at all for you to withhold information from which you have. It does nothing to allay the doubts of anyone for you to withhold information. The antiquity of the zodiac in Egypt is much doubted. That is because they had an entirely different one. I'm researching the zodiac, trying to get together what I am doing, and they had like 20 zodiacal signs. So, yeah. The antiquity of the zodiac in Egypt is much doubted, and it is denied point blank with regard to India. Your conclusions are often excellent, but your premises are always doubtful, the writer was once told by a profane friend. To this, the answer came that it was 1 point, at least, gained on the scientific syllogisms. For, with the exception of a few problems from the domain of purely physical science, both the premises and conclusions of the men of science are hypothetical, as they are almost invariably erroneous. And if they do not so appear to the profane, the reason is simply this: the said profane is very little aware, taking as he does his scientific data on faith, that both premises and conclusions are generally the product of the same brains, which, however learned, are not infallible. A truism demonstrated daily by the shifting and reshifting of scientific theories and speculations. However it may be, the records of the temple, zodiacal and traditional, as well as the ideographic records of the East, as read by the adepts of the sacred science and Vidya, are not a whit more doubtful than the so-called ancient history of the European nations, now edited, corrected, and amplified by half a century of archaeological discoveries and the very problematical readings of the Assyrian tiles, cuneiform fragments, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. So are our data based upon the same readings, in addition to an almost inexhaustible number of secret works of which Europe knows nothing, plus the perfect knowledge by the initiates of the symbolism of every word so recorded. Some of these records belong to an immense antiquity. Every archaeologist and paleontologist is acquainted with the ideographic productions of certain semi-savage tribes, who, from time immemorial, have aimed at rendering their thoughts symbolically. This is the earliest mode of recording events and ideas, and how old this knowledge is in the human race may be inferred from some signs, evidently ideographic, found on hatchets of the Paleolithic period. The Red Indian tribes of America, only a few years ago, comparatively speaking, petitioned the President of the United States to grant them possession of 4 small lakes, the petition being written on the tiny surface of a piece of fabric, which is covered with barely a dozen representations of animals and birds. See Lubbock. The American savages have a number of such different kinds of writing, but not one of our scientists is yet familiar or even knows of the early hieroglyphic cipher, still preserved in some fraternities and named in occultism the Senzar. I am going to pop that out for looking it up in a little while. Moreover, all those who have decided to regard such modes of writing, e.g. the ideographs of the Red Indians, and even the Chinese characters as attempts of the early races of mankind to express their untutored thoughts, will decidedly object to our statement that writing was invented by the Atlanteans and not at all by the Phoenicians. Indeed, such a claim as that writing was known to mankind many hundreds of millenniums ago, in the face of the philologists who have declared that writing was unknown in the days of, and to, Panini in India, as also to the Greeks in the time of Homer, will be met by general disapprobation, if not with silent scorn. All denial and ridicule notwithstanding, the occultists will maintain the claim, and simply for this reason. From Bacon down to our modern Royal Society, we have a too long period, full of the most ludicrous mistakes made by science, to warrant our believing in modern scientific assumptions rather than in the denials of our teachers. Writing, our scientists say, was unknown to Panini, and this sage nevertheless composed a grammar which contains 3,996 rules, and is the most perfect of all the grammars that were ever made. Panini is made out to have lived barely a few centuries B.C. by the most liberal, and the rocks in Iran and Central Asia, whence the philologists and historians show us the ancestors of the same Panini, the Brahmins, coming into India, are covered with writing, 2,000 and 3,000 years old, 12,000 according to some fearless paleontologists. Writing was and ars incognita in the days of Hesiod and Homer, agreeably to Grote and unknown to the Greeks so late as 770 B.C. And the Phoenicians, who had invented it, and knew writing as far back as 1500 B.C. at the earliest. Footnote. It is an historical fact that Sanchoniathon compiled and wrote the Phoenician characters from annals and state documents in the archives of the older Phoenician cities, the full record of their religion in 1250 B.C. At the earliest, were living among the Greeks and elbowing them all the time. All these scientific and contradictory conclusions disappeared, however, into thin air when Schliemann discovered the site of ancient Troy, whose actual existence had been so long regarded as a fable. It is important to note that I am fairly positive that this has been proven to be not the site of Troy, right? We have only, as far as I'm aware, and I am fully willing to be corrected on this because I did not deep dive it at all, as far as I'm aware, we are only now in the last 5 years coming to the point where we're like, oh, this is probably where Troy was, right? And that's not even a firm, this is where Troy was. It was a, this is probably where. And that is almost certainly not the same place that Schliemann discovered. And again, I am perfectly willing to be corrected on that. And B, excavated on that site earthenware vessels with inscriptions and characters unknown to the paleontologists and the all-denying Sanskritists, who will now deny Troy or these archaic inscriptions. As Professor Virchow witnesses, I was myself an eyewitness of 2 such discoveries and helped to gather the articles together. The slanderers have long since been silenced, who were not ashamed to charge the discoverer with an imposture. Footnote 2. Professor Virchow in Appendix 1 of Schliemann's Ilios. Nor were truthful women spared any more than truthful men. Du Kylo, Gordon Cumming, Madame Marian, footnote 3. Goss writes of the latter, "She is set down a thorough heretic, not at all to be believed, a manufacturer of unsound natural history, an inventor of false facts in science." I don't know anything about the situation. Bruce and a host of others were charged with lying. Madame Marian, says the author of Mythical Monsters, who gives this information in the introduction, was accused of deliberate falsehood in reference to her description of a bird-eating spider nearly 200 years ago. But nowadays, reliable observers have confirmed it in regards to South America, India, and elsewhere. That is true, there are several. Audubon was accused by botanists of having invented the yellow water lily, which he figured in his Birds Under the South under the name of Nymphaea lutea, and, after having lain under the imputation for years, was confirmed at last by the discovery of the long-lost flower in Florida in 1867. And, as Audubon was called a liar for this, and for his Holiatus washingtoni, footnote 4, Dr. Cover writes, "That famous bird of Washington was a myth. Either Audubon was mistaken, or else, as some do not hesitate to affirm, he lied about it." Knowing what we do about Audubon now, like I live in Louisiana, Audubon is like a national treasure down here. We have Audubon parks, we have an Audubon trailway, there's an Audubon golf trail. Like, Audubon is a big deal around here, so we know a little bit about him. Right? He was an avid naturalist. He was somebody who was fully committed to going out daily and investigating nature and recording it to the best of his ability. And for you to impugn his character by saying that he would invent something is simply ludicrous to me. Right? And by you, I mean whoever this person was. You can say whatever you want, but it doesn't make it true, right? Like, why would somebody go out and record faithfully thousands of species, but then just invent one? Why? There has to be a motivation for that big of an assumption about somebody. Audubon was called a liar for this and for his Holiatus washingtoni. So, Victor Hugo was ridiculed for his marvelous word painting of the devilfish, and his description of a man becoming its helpless victim. The thing was derided as an impossibility, yet within a few years were discovered on the shores of Newfoundland cuttlefish with arms extending 30 feet in length, and capable of dragging a good-sized boat beneath the surface, and their actions have been reproduced for centuries past by Japanese artists. Now, I am going to assume that what is meant here is some type of a squid, right? Squid, octopi, something along that nature. Giant squid are a thing. They eat whales, and so they can grab ships, I am sure. And if Troy was denied and regarded as a myth, the existence of Herculaneum and Pompeii declared a fiction, the travels of Marco Polo laughed at and called an absurd fable, as one of Baron Munchausen's tales, why should the writer of Isis Unveiled and of The Secret Doctrine be any better treated? Mr. Charles Gould, the author of the above-cited volume, quotes in his excellent work a few lines from Macmillan, which are as true as life and too much to the point not to be reproduced. When a naturalist, either by visiting such spots of earth as are still out of the way or by his good fortune, finds a very queer plant or animal, he is forthwith accused of inventing his game. As soon as the creature is found to sin against preconception, the great misguiding spirit, a priori by name, who furnishes philosophers with their omniscience pro re nata, whispers that no such thing can be, and forthwith there is a charge of hoax. The heavens themselves have been charged with hoaxes. When Leverrier and Adams predicted a planet by calculation, it was gravely asserted in some quarters that the planet which had been calculated was not the planet, but another which had clandestinely and improperly gotten into the neighborhood of the true body. The disposition to suspect hoax is stronger than the disposition to hoax. Who was it that first announced that the classical writings of Greece and Rome were one huge hoax, perpetrated by the monks in what the announcer would be as little or less inclined to Dr. Maitland to call the Dark Ages? Thus, let it be, no disbeliever who takes the secret doctrine for a hoax is forced or even asked to credit our statements. These have already been proclaimed to be such by a very clever American journalist before even the work went to press. Footnote. So far back as July 1888, at a time when the manuscript of this work had not yet left my writing table and the secret doctrine was utterly unknown to the world, it was already being denounced as a product of my brain and no more. These are the flattering terms in which the Evening Telegraph of America referred to this still unpublished work in its issue of June 30th of 1888. Among the fascinating books for July reading is Madame Blavatsky's new book on Theosophy, The Secret Doctrine. But because she can soar back into the Brahmin ignorance, is no proof that everything she says is true. And once the prejudiced verdict given on the mistaken notice that my book was out and that the reviewer had read it, neither of which was or could be the case, now that it is really out, the critic will have to support his first statement, whether correct or otherwise, and thus get out of it, probably by more slashing criticism than ever. I lost my spot. There we are. Nor is it, after all, necessary that anyone should believe in occult sciences and the old teachings before one knows anything or even believes in his own soul. No great truth was ever accepted a priori, and generally a century or two has passed before it began to glimmer in the human consciousness as a possible verity, except in such cases as the positive discovery of the thing claimed as a fact. The truths of today are the falsehoods and errors of yesterday, and vice versa. It is only in the 20th century that portions, if not the whole, of the present work will be vindicated. It is no fact going against our statements, therefore, even if Sir John Evans does affirm that writing was unknown in the Stone Age. For it may have been unknown during that period in the fifth Aryan race, and have been perfectly known to the Atlanteans of the fourth, in the palmy days of their highest civilization. The cycles of the rise and fall of the nations and races are there to account for it. If told that there have been cases before now of forged pseudographs being palmed off on the credulous, and that our work may be classed with Jacolat's Bible in India, in which, by the way, there are more truths among its errors than are found in the works of orthodox and recognized Orientalists, the charge and comparison will dismay us very little. We bide our time. Even the famous Esoterica of the last century, considered by Voltaire the most precious gift from the East to the West, and by Max Muller, about the silliest book that can be read, is not altogether without facts and truths in it. The cases when the a priori negations of specialists became justified by subsequent corroborations form but an insignificant percentage of those that were fully vindicated by subsequent discoveries and confirmed, to the great dismay of the learned objectors. Esoterica was a very small bone of contention compared with the triumph of Sir William Jones and the Quelle de Perron and others in the matter of Sanskrit and its literature. Such facts are recorded by Professor Max Muller himself, who, speaking of the discomfiture of de Gault, Stewart, and Company in connection with this, states that if the facts about Sanskrit were true, Dugard Stewart was too wise not to see that the conclusions drawn from it were inevitable. He therefore denied the reality of such a language as Sanskrit altogether, and wrote his famous essay to prove that Sanskrit had been put together after the model of Greek and Latin by those arch-forgers and liars, the Brahmins, and that the whole of Sanskrit literature was an imposition, science of language. The writer is quite willing and feels proud to keep company with the Brahmins and other historical liars, in the opinion of our modern Dugald Stewarts. She has lived too long, and her experience has been too varied and personal for her not to know at least something of human nature. When you doubt, abstain, says the wise Zoroaster, whose prudent aphorism is found corroborated in every case by daily life and experience. Yet, like St. John the Baptist, this sage of the past ages is found preaching in the desert, in company with a more modern philosopher, namely Bacon, who offers the same priceless bit of practical wisdom. In contemplation, he says, in any questions of knowledge we add, if a man begins with certainties, he shall end in doubts, but if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. With this piece of advice, from the father of English philosophy to the representatives of British skepticism, we ought to close the debate, but our theosophical readers are entitled to a final piece of occult information. Enough was said to show that evolution in general, events, mankind, and everything else in nature proceed in cycles. We have spoken of 7 races, 5 of which have nearly completed their earthly career and have claimed that every root race, with its sub-races and innumerable family divisions and tribes, was entirely distinct from its preceding and succeeding race. This will be objected to on the authority of uniform experience in the question of anthropology and ethnology. Man was, save in color and type, and perhaps a difference in facial peculiarities and cranial capacity, ever the same under every climate and in every part of the world, says the naturalist. Aye, even in stature. This, while maintaining that man descends from the same unknown ancestor as the ape, a claim that is logically impossible without an infinite variation of stature and form from his first evolution into a biped. The very logical persons who maintain both propositions are welcome to their paradoxical views. Once more, we address only those who, doubting the general derivation of myths from the contemplation of the visible workings of external nature, think it less hard to believe that these wonderful stories of gods and demigods, of giants and dwarfs, of dragons and monsters of all descriptions and transformations, than to believe them to be inventions. It is only such transformations in physical nature, as much as in the memory and conceptions of our present mankind, that the secret doctrine teaches. It confronts the purely speculative hypotheses of modern science, based upon the experience and exact observations of barely a few centuries, with the unbroken tradition and records of its sanctuaries, and brushing away that tissue of cobweb-like theories spun in the darkness that covers a period of hardly a few millenniums back, and which Europeans call their history. The old science says to us, listen now to my version of the memoirs of humanity. The human races are born one from the other, grow, develop, become old, and die. Their sub-races and nations follow the same rule. If you're all denying modern science and so-called philosophy, do not contest that the human family is composed of a variety of well-defined types and races. It is only because the fact is undeniable. No one would say that there was no external difference between an Englishman, an African Negro, and a Japanese or Chinaman. On the other hand, it is firmly denied by most naturalists that mixed human races, in example the seeds for entirely new races, are any longer formed in our days. Wait, denied by most naturalists that mixed races, well, it definitely happens, right? There are several in my family. I am one, right? If you do not know, I am only mostly white. Irish, Native American, and Cajun, right? That is my 3 ethnicities there. But this last is maintained on good grounds by de Quatrefages and some others. Nevertheless, our general proposition will not be accepted. It will be said that whatever forms man has passed through in the long prehistoric past, there are no more changes for him, save certain variations, as at present in the future. Hence, that our 6th and 7th root races are fictions. To this it is again answered, how do you know? Your experience is limited to a few thousand years, to less than a day in the whole age of humanity, and to the present types of the actual continents and isles of our 5th race. How can you tell what will or will not be? Meanwhile, such is the prophecy of these secret books, and they're no uncertain statements. Since the beginning of the Atlantean race, many million years have passed. Yet, we find the last of the Atlanteans still mixed up with the Aryan element 11,000 years ago. This shows the enormous overlapping of one race over the race which succeeds it, Though in character and external type, the elder loses its characteristics and assumes the new features of the younger race. This is proved in all the formations of mixed human races. Now, occult philosophy teaches that even now, under our very eyes, the new race and races are preparing to be formed, and that it is in America that the transformation will take place and has already silently commenced. Pure Anglo-Saxons, hardly 300 years ago, the Americans of the United States have already become a nation apart, and, owing to a strong admixture of various nationalities and intermarriage, almost a race sui generis, not only mentally but also physically. Every mixed race, when uniform and settled, has been able to play the part of a primary race in fresh crossings, says de Quatrefages. Mankind, in its present state, has thus been formed, certainly, for the greatest part by the successive crossing of a number of races at present undetermined, the human species. Thus the Americans have become, in only 3 centuries, a primary race pro tem, before becoming a race apart and strongly separated from all other now existing races. They are, in short, the germs of the 6th subrace, and in some few hundred years more will become, most decidedly, the pioneers of that race, which must succeed the present European or 5th subrace in all its new characteristics. After this, in about 25,000 years, they will launch into preparations for the 7th subrace, until, in consequence of cataclysms, the first series of those which must one day destroy Europe, and still later the whole Aryan race, and thus affect both Americas, as also most of the lands directly connected with the confines of our continent and isles, the 6th root race will have appeared on the stage of our round. When shall this be? 12,000-year disaster cycle. When shall this be? Who knows, save the great masters of wisdom, perchance, as they are silent upon the subject as the snow-capped peaks that tower above them, and the 12,000-year disaster cycle. All we know is that it will silently come into existence, so silently indeed that for long millenniums shall its pioneers, the peculiar children who will grow into peculiar men and women, be regarded as anomalous lusus naturae, abnormal oddities physically and mentally. Then, as they increase and their numbers become with every age greater, one day they will awake to find themselves in the majority. It is the present men who will then begin to be regarded as exceptional mongrels, until these die out in their turn in civilized lands, surviving only in small groups on islands, the mountain peaks of today, where they will vegetate, denigrate, and finally degenerate and finally die out. Perhaps millions of years hence, as the Aztecs have, as the Nyam Nyam and the dwarfest Mula Corumba of the Nigleri Hills are dying. All these are remnants of once mighty races, the recollection of whose existence has entirely died out of the remembrance of the modern generations, just as we shall vanish from the memory of the 6th race humanity. The 5th will overlap the 6th race for many hundreds of millenniums, changing with it slower than its new successor, still changing in stature, general physique, and mentality, just as the 4th overlapped our Aryan race and the 3rd had overlapped the Atlanteans. This process of preparation for the 6th great race must last throughout the whole 6th and 7th subraces. Vide supra, the diagram of the genealogical tree of the 5th race. But the last remnants of the 5th continent will not disappear until some time after the birth of the new race, when another and new dwelling, the 6th continent, will have appeared above the new waters on the face of the globe, so as to receive the new stranger. To it also will emigrate and settle all those who shall be fortunate enough to escape the general disaster. When this shall be, as just said, it is not for the writer to know. 12,000-year disaster cycle. Only as nature no more proceeds by sudden jumps and starts than man changes suddenly from a child into a mature man, the final cataclysm will be preceded by many smaller submersions and destructions, both by wave and volcanic fires. The exultant pulse will beat high in the hearts of the race now in the American zone, but There will be no more Americans when the sixth race commences. No more, in fact, than Europeans, for they will now have become a new race and many new nations. Yet the fifth will not die, but survive for a while, overlapping the new race for many hundred thousands of years to come, and it will be transformed with it, slower than its new successor, still getting entirely altered in mentality, general physique, and stature. Mankind will not grow again into giant bodies, as in the case of the Lemurians and the Atlanteans, because while the evolution of the fourth race led the latter down to the very bottom of materiality and its physical development, the present race is on its ascending arc, and the sixth will be rapidly growing out of its bonds of matter, and even of flesh. Thus it is that the mankind of the New World, one by far the senior of our old one, a fact men had also forgotten, of Patala, the antipodes, or the netherworld, as America is called in India, whose mission and karma it is to sow the seeds for a forthcoming, grander, and far more glorious race than any of those we know of at present. The cycles of matter will be succeeded by cycles of spirituality and a fully developed mind. On the law of parallel history and races, the majority of the future mankind will be composed of glorious adepts. Humanity is the child of cyclic destiny, and not one of its units can escape its unconscious mission, or get rid of the burden of its cooperative work with nature. Thus will mankind, race after race, perform its appointed cycle pilgrimage. Climates will and have already begun to change, each tropical year after the other dropping one subrace, but only to beget another higher race on the ascending cycle, while a series of other less favored groups, the failures of nature, will, like some individual men, vanish from the human family without even leaving a trace behind. Such is the course of nature under the sway of karmic law, of the ever-present and the ever-becoming nature. For in the words of a sage, known only to a few occultists, the present is the child of the past, the future the begotten of the present, and yet, O present moment, knowest thou not that thou hast no parent, nor can thou have a child, that thou art ever begetting but thyself? Before thou hast even begun to say, I am the progeny of the departed moment, the child of the past, thou hast become that past itself. Before thou utterest the last syllable, behold, thou art no more, the present but verily that future. Thus are the past, the present, and the future, the ever-living Trinity in one, the Mahamaya of the Absolute is. And that is going to bring us to the end of the conclusion. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I didn't have a whole lot to add to this. Most of the things that she has talked about, we have talked about in extensive detail. If this is your first video, right, if you just found me today, there's a lot more to dig into, right? The Esoterica playlist contains a lot of information. We have gone through and talked about this extensively. We talked about the 12,000 year disaster cycle. We talked about the fact that if you are making decisions based upon melanin, you're an idiot and an asshole. We've talked about the fact that not having the opportunity to learn something does not mean that you don't have the capacity to learn something. We've learned that racism is outdated and should not be paid attention to, right? We've learned a lot of things in this lesson. But there's not a whole lot for me to extrapolate in this, right? We've already covered all of this. Her numbers, they're numbers, but we don't know where she got them from. They just seem to be made up based on the grand cycle. And yes, the grand cycle does exist. There is a grand cosmic cycle. There is a precession of the equinox. These things do happen. It takes a long time of observing the heavens to understand that they happen. But once you have the understanding that they do happen, you can make all kinds of calculations based upon the observations. And so it is not hard to understand, okay, it takes almost 24,000 years for this cycle to complete. Well, now we can say that there are cycles, right? And once you know that there are cycles, you can extrapolate that there may have been more cycles. Now, I'm not saying that that is what happened, but that is something that could have happened. It is entirely possible for people to speculate about things and write them down as though they are truth. That doesn't make them true, right? It makes them speculation. And as long as you contain my speculation is speculation, you're fine, right? You can speculate about anything you want. You just can't say that it is true. Like, you don't get to definitively say that somebody that is born on the continent of Australia is genetically inferior to other people because they haven't had the opportunity to learn something, right? That is not a fact. That is your speculations. We have to maintain speculations in the realm of speculations. Even the things that I firmly believe, if they have not been proven, if they are not replicable, I say they are speculations, right? I've healed myself through the use of magic. That is still speculative until somebody else does the same thing. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow, throw me a comment. If you agree or disagree with anything that was stated in here, drop it in the box down below. And if it remains respectful, that's the part people have a hard time with, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss or read aloud, drop that in the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider a membership or picking up a copy of my book. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt's Take. Peace.